John, which of the teams, Philly or Dallas, feels like they can, I don't want to say get hot, but right their ship in these final four? Now, Dallas only has 3 weeks left, but which team feels like they can at least get it on back on track?
Well, to me, it's been the Eagles. It's been that way for a while, and that's why, and I often talk about people misplace my optimism, and I put that in air quotes, as being favored towards the Eagles. It's got nothing to do with the Eagles. It has to do with the other team, in this case, Dallas Cowboys. They're off the rails, and it starts at the top. Forget about the talent. Forget about the coaching staff. The owner of the team is unhinged, and that's where this all stems from, because I think it all started when he made those comments and intimated that he was going to be moving on from Jason Garrett. Well, the players get that. They understand that. They hear that. They understand he's a lame duck. And now he's gone down the other route. He's tried to blame it on the players. It's a circus, and it's one of the reasons why owners only talk once or twice a year, not after every game, not for a half hour. I'm sure you've all saw what he did on the radio today on his weekly radio spot. And think about the owner of an NFL team having a weekly radio spot. That's the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, and I guess you ask, is the bigger problem the coach or the owner out there? If you were to say one has more of a hand in why this team is where they are right now.
Oh, no question, the owner, because the owner runs everything there. The coach isn't even, and I say this a lot when people criticize Jason Garrett, the coach is not a typical coach. You try to compare him to other NFL coaches, it doesn't matter. The comparison doesn't matter because he doesn't have the typical power of a coach. And there are levels to that as well, but this is a guy who had the ability to call plays taken away from him years ago. He can't pick his defensive coordinator. Jerry Jones took that responsibility away from Rod Marinelli and gave it to Chris Richard, even though one is called the defensive coordinator. The other is really the defensive coordinator. It's dysfunction. And he'll pay you a lot to be a part of that dysfunction. That's why he can get names as coaches, but they don't have traditional power as coaches.
Hey, it's funny, John, you mentioned that whole Rod Marinelli, Chris Richard dynamic because it worked last year, right? They won the division, and they look like a good defensive team. But we were talking today about how that's a carbon copy of what ultimately led to the downfall of Andy Reid here in Philly, right? When he had Jim Washburn presiding only over the front four and Juan Castillo was allowed to just do everything on the back end, and that was a disaster for the Eagles, led to the whole downfall of everything. And it seems like now that what started off pretty good is not working for Dallas. And I don't know that there's disconnect between Richard or Marinelli, but we've seen a couple of times now Dallas having a lead and then completely imploding, and that's what happened to the Eagles a lot with Juan Castillo. They were up, and they would blow leads constantly.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a difference. I think in that case, Jim Washburn was completely off the reservation doing whatever he wanted. And that's kind of surprising if you think about Andy Reid and his history and how badly that went to Juan Castillo. Just that was a strange hire. I mean, that might be the strangest thing Andy's ever done in his coaching career. But in this case, I mean, Richard is the defensive coordinator. He's in charge. It's not like you have a push and pull. Rod is the defensive line coach, and they let him keep the title to save face. But the other guy's in charge. So there's a clear demarcation line. It's not, there's no back and forth on who's responsible for this, who's responsible for that. I mean, Chris Richard calls the defense, and that's how it goes. And Rod is, before he became a well-respected defense coordinator, was a defensive line coach, and that's sort of how it is. But I think the way Jerry does business is just bizarre. And, if you don't like how a defensive coordinator is doing his job, you generally just move on to the next guy. But he keeps the old guy around for whatever reason. I don't know if anybody can get to the depths of what Jerry Jones is doing, but you have to go back to Scott Linehan for when he took the play calling away from Jason Garrett, and when Jason Garrett became just a cheerleader. Everybody makes fun of the clapping. He's a figurehead. He's not in control of anything.
Is that really the case? Like, he's not we joke and we say it all the time. I say it just as much as anyone. Jerry has, he's the puppet master. What does Jason Garrett really do?
It's like Office
in
Space.
All
What would you say you
what
actually
do?
do?
You actually do here?
I compare it, and Amazon has a good show, All or Nothing, and the Eagles are going to be on it next year. They did the Dallas Cowboys one year. I compare it to him being at the daycare, and he's the guy day to day in charge. You left off, but I mean, that's essentially what he does. He's a caretaker of the team, and he does the day to day running the practice. But if there's a difficult decision that has to be made, it's made by Jerry Jones, and a lot of people joke he should make himself the coach. I think he secretly wants to do that, but he also knows how badly he will be laughed at if he tries that. It remains to be seen if he goes down that road. I think he'd love to do it.
Man, we are sitting here having a huge laugh at the expense of the Cowboys, and yet I think in 2 weeks when the Cowboys come in and do what they normally do against the Eagles and look like one of the best teams in football, we're going to be sitting here being like, what is going on?
I guess let's go back to that, John. Like, you watch Dallas the last couple of games, and especially because they've been on primetime, so you get a chance to kind of see them up close. Because, typically if you're at the Eagles, you don't maybe see them in live while they're happening. But what are they lacking on the field, 53 men, or 46, I guess, on game day, that's not getting it done?
Well, offensively, I think, and this is, I think people in Philadelphia should take note of how badly that offense has performed since Amari Cooper got injured with a quad, and he's played through it, and he's tried to play through it, but he's not the same guy. And it's become much more difficult for them to do things in the passing game. And I think we've seen it with Alshon Jeffrey. I mean, coaching staffs and in the case down there, the ownership, as I said, they respect players who play through things. And it means a lot to the organization, means a lot to the team, but you're not as effective. And I use that stasis word all the time. Fans don't realize. I mean, they say, what's wrong with Amari Cooper? He's banged up. He's not healthy. He's trying to play through it. And that affects every other part of that passing game, and it's not nearly as effective. Defensively, I think it's two things. A lot of people overvalued, again, similar to Philadelphia, the talent on hand. It's just not as good as people thought it was. And the back seven is just a mess. It is. And part of it is scheme. I mean, you saw that one sequence where Wims got hurt for Chicago. They went to Wims on 2 plays in a row, and I forget the third play, but it was a receiver for the touchdown. Mm-hmm. How do you have 3 receivers, and Jalen Smith is covering, and by the way, he did a pretty good job, but nonetheless, what kind of scheme has a linebacker on a receiver time and time again? So then you start pointing at Chris Richard and saying, what the heck are you doing?
So John, though, when we talk about why the Cowboys seem to match up, play well against the Eagles, I do feel like they have a matchup advantage in that they've got good perimeter weapons, especially when Amari's healthy, but even if he's not, he's really good, and a mobile quarterback. The Eagles, like when they played Josh Allen, he had no perimeter weapons. It was very windy. When they played Mitchell Trubisky, he's mobile, but he doesn't have perimeter weapons other than Allen Robinson like the Cowboys do, and Dak is better than Mitchell Trubisky. I do feel that even if they're both train wrecks, when they play each other, I feel like Dallas's perimeter weaponry is a bad matchup for the Eagles' back-end defense, and that's always seems to be a big factor.
Well, I think you've seen a number of receivers, and the latest being Devontae Parker, so I don't think these corners hold up well against top-tier receivers. So if Amari Cooper is healthy, they're going to have issues with him. And most people have had issues with Amari when he's healthy ever since he arrived in Dallas. So, I don't think that would be a surprise. I think the bigger issue is they've never been able to beat him with Ezekiel Elliott. But Zeke's not having a great year. And I think if you go, at least for him, and you go back, people forget the holdout, and he didn't have most of training camp, in fact, all of training camp, and he came in late. I think that affects players. But until the Eagles beat this team, it's going to be difficult to pick them, other than the fact you look at Dallas and they're imploding, and the fact that the Eagles are better at home, significantly better, especially defensively. But it's going to come down to that game, and I've thought that for weeks and weeks and weeks. That will be the NFC title game, Week 16, Dallas at Philadelphia. Whoever wins it is going to win that division.
Well, how likely is it that Philly might be in trouble getting to that game? 3 starters did not practice today. 1 was limited. Nelson Aguilar out today with a knee injury. Derek Barnett did not practice with an ankle, and Camus with a concussion. Howard still limited with the shoulder. Now, it's Friday, not the normal Friday, because they play Monday, so I guess tomorrow would be the bigger day if these guys can't practice. But are we getting a sense on any of those 4 guys?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Jordan Howard isn't going to play again. I don't think there's any question about that, which is a disappointment. I talked a little about it yesterday. They seem to have lost their identity without him offensively. And as far as the other guys, Camus, Grugier-Hill is starting to get a little bit better, and they've really been splitting the work between him and Nate Gary. So I'm not going to overstate his emphasis on that particular defense. I think they can cobble through. Barnett's the bigger one to me because he played one of the few Eagles who played pretty well against Miami, and he's been coming on along a bit, and he's important. But I don't think this is the week where you say, are they in danger? I think next week maybe is more of a danger because it's on the road, because the coaching change in Washington seems to have given that team at least a little bit of juice. But, the numbers are the numbers with the Eagles against Eli Manning. So we just talked about the Cowboys. You can't trust the Eagles to beat the Cowboys. Well, how do you trust Eli Manning quarterback team to beat the Eagles? 9 out of 10, 17 out of 21. They just own this guy, and he hasn't played for 10 weeks. This is, if anything, and I know people are going to say, well, they lost to Miami. If anything, this is easier than Miami because it's at home, and it's because of an opponent they're used to and they've had tremendous success against. And again, you look at the numbers of Jim Schwartz defenses, home versus road, pretty significant. Yeah, they tend to play well on defense at home.
I'd be a little probably more concerned about the Barnett injury if he weren't to play, just because then you're talking about starting defensive ends being Brandon, and I get, would they start Vinny, or do you think they would start Josh Sweat and then start Vinny and then bring Sweat off the bench and then move Graham inside and have Vinny on the outside? It's just not as kind of tenacious of a pass rush as.
No, I agree. I that to me is the biggest one is if Barnett can't go, and it kind of doesn't matter. They might defer to Vinny as a veteran, but I think Josh will get most of the work, especially in the nickel package outside.
Maybe a little more Gennardo Avery, perhaps.
Yeah, Gennard Avery as well.
Forgot about that guy.
But you also have to look at the opponent and. Moving back to Eli and the understanding of how you have to play with Eli.
Well, he's probably gonna do the just throw it under, and then if he has a few chances to throw it deep to Slayton, who I don't think we're talking about enough as a guy who might kind of threaten this game a little bit, and it might be pouring, so maybe not, but he's got more speed. He's the kind of guy who I could see beating the Eagles over the top a few times if Eli can give him that opportunity, and that's obviously the big if.
Yeah, and I think if people are going to look at the 50-50 balls and what Ryan Fitzpatrick did and say we can take advantage of the Eagles there, because it's pretty clear that Jim Schwartz isn't going to help his corners, even when they're getting tortured. But Devontae Parker's a talented guy. I mean, he's never lived up to the billing. I think he was a 14th overall pick. I mean, he's really gifted. And if you look at the Giants receivers, they don't have a guy like that who can just dominate you physically. They have good receivers and haven't been able to get them. And people know Golden Tate. We'll see if he's able to go. And Shepard, and a lot of them haven't been healthy, and they haven't been able to get their four playmakers on the field at the same time. That's the big narrative in New York. If you add Ingram and Barkley in there and the injury problems they've had as well. So everyone says if they can ever get all those guys on the field together, maybe some things can happen. But now you don't have the quarterback as well, and you got to go back to Eli Manning. I mean, at some point, the Eagles, if they do want to win this division, they just got to beat a bad football team. And Dallas, people in Dallas are saying the same thing. So they were facing tougher opponents at Chicago. Said yesterday on the show the Bears were going to win that game. I think they're going to lose to the Rams as well. So, I mean, the good news from the Cowboys' perspective is it's still easier for them. The path is easier for them. But it all comes down to Week 16. It's really a one-game season because all these crazy things, and people are talking about, the Washington Redskins could still win this division technically. And oh, by the way, if the draft was today, they have the third overall pick. That's how bad this division is.
That's unbelievable.
That is
amazing. That's so amazing. So what's going to be the identity of this team then? We talked about it all year. We talked about it the other day with Jordan Howard hurt. That's really changed things. Miles Sanders clearly is not trusted yet to get the bulk, although he's been touching the ball more frequently as the season has progressed here. But what are you looking to see from the Eagles, really on both sides, John, but specifically on offense?
Well, it seems like we've been talking about it the entire year, and then the first issue was Deshaun, and they couldn't figure it out how to put it together, and they seemed to stumble into the new identity with Jordan Howard as the lead back and Miles being the change of pace, and then Jordan went down, and I haven't been able to figure it out again. So I think the coaching staff has been slow to adjust. I think that's fair to say, certainly on the offensive side, and they don't have any more time for mulligans. So Jeff and I mentioned it a little bit yesterday. You gotta give the ball to Miles Sanders. You got to stop hand-wringing about, okay, maybe he's not picking up the blitz on a particular play. Maybe he's not in the right spot as an outlet receiver. So what? Just play him because he's your best player at that position. And just use him because he's your best player at that position.
Isn't a little of that indicting their own selves, like as the coaching staff saying, we don't have this kid prepared?
I don't know if it's that as much as and the Eagles are not the only staff like this. There are a lot of staffs in the NFL that don't trust young players because they don't know the entire offense, or on specific plays they're not as well versed as maybe a veteran player who's less talented and who knows the offense. And hey, you have to understand, and Doug has said it as a former player. He says it, he verbalizes it consistently. And this league is about talent first and foremost. And you could be the most fundamentally sound player and understand your role and understand where you have to be and do all that. But guess what? If some guy's just really talented, he's going to be better than you. And that's just how it's worked. It's how it's always worked. And I'm surprised as a former player that it's taken Doug so long to figure that kind of thing out.
All right, Johnny Mac, of course, Monday night, the Eagles take on the Giants, and we'll have full coverage of that game. And you can hear it live on 97.3 ESPN. And we shall see. The injury report, of course, as we mentioned, Barnett, Aguilar, and Camus, they are out today. We'll see if what happens at practice tomorrow. And limited again, Jordan Howard. So it looks like he is trending towards not playing. John, I will talk to you in a couple of weeks, my friend.
All right. Where are you going? Anywhere exciting?
All over the map.
Baltimore.
All over the map.
It's always Baltimore.
That's your city.
That's me. Yep. They renamed it, I heard. That's why I got to go down there for the enshrinement.
All right, kid.
Baltimore.
Thanks for having me.
All right, man.